What's up? It's me. So recently I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube from polymath creators, which is basically kind of a term for people who do multiple hobbies, or have multiple talents, or multiple interests, or just multiple specialties. Basically, jack of all trades type of thing. And I've always kind of thought of myself as a little bit of a renaissance man, partly because my ADHD makes it so I can't focus on one thing for very long, but also because I don't think that you should focus on one thing your whole life. I think you should be able to do multiple things. I think it's a good thing. One creator I like in particular, Vaughn, has a lot of great videos on his channel about managing multiple hobbies, about scheduling around it. Now, not all of his content is like super in-depth or even super genius, I don't think. Like, I think a lot of his like scheduling stuff is pretty basic, right? Like it's pretty much just, you figure out what you want to do and then actually do it and don't mess around. That being said, I really enjoy his style of content. I really enjoy watching it, so I definitely recommend checking him out if that sounds interesting to you. However, the reason I'm doing this video today is because it occurred to me. It occurred to me while I was watching this and listening to this content from Gene and different creators, is that I've noticed in my own life a lot of this ability to juggle multiple hobbies, to have multiple interests, to teach myself things, without having to be in a classroom setting, comes from my time being homeschooled, specifically, especially in high school, because by the end of my education, I was pretty much unschooled, which for those of you who don't know, basically that's when you kind of become the arbiter of your own education. Now, personally, I've got problems with that idea of running your own education or letting kids do their own education. I think most kids in that environment are not going to learn much, and I've certainly suffered from that lack of structure and that a lot of the inability to commit long term, to stay focused, to push myself through difficult periods, and obviously that continues into adulthood. Like, nobody's really good at pushing themselves through with stuff once they get difficult. But in a lot of ways, I think I have also gained an incredible ability to kind of just pick up things that most people wouldn't feel like they could. And I think a lot of that is kind of comes from that ego you get from spending your whole childhood just picking up random things. I was watching this video from Chris Howard. For those of you who don't know, he's a brilliant YouTuber. He is currently going to film school, and I cannot wait to see kind of stuff he comes out with, because I've always admired him. He is a brilliant mind. He's a brilliant cinematographer, and he did this video. It wasn't about this per se, but he was talking about how much of his childhood was defined by boredom. Like, he would have periods where he had nothing to do. He had school didn't take that much time. He only ever saw his friends like once a week, and so a lot of times he would just have nothing to do. Now, that's a experience that a lot of homeschoolers have, but for him, he found or the way to fill his days was to make YouTube videos and get really good at that. And he is, like I said, brilliant at it. Check out his vlogs, his storytime videos. They are some of the best stuff on YouTube right now. I don't think, like, I have seen very few creators that are just this talented, especially single creators, like individuals creating this kind of like super cinematic looking videos with, no budget. It's incredible, all the stuff he's been able to accomplish. He's super committed to this. Now, I don't think Chris Howard is a polymath. He's very hyper-focused on this. However, that aspect of growing up homeschooled and having to, get rid of your own boredom by picking up multiple hobbies, I think is in many ways a valuable experience. I don't think every homeschooler is going to have this experience. Obviously, homeschoolers are not a monolith. Some of them are much more structured. Some of them are kind of like their parents are a little more strict with their education, which means they don't have as much freedom to do whatever they want. I have a lot of thoughts about homeschooling in general, like how it goes right, how it goes wrong. I've been working on a video about it for past 2 years, and it's not anywhere close to being done. So who knows? It may never happen. That being said, I think this is potentially a possible example of where homeschooling can benefit you. And I'm curious if anybody else has the same experience, like going into adulthood and still juggling multiple hobbies, still being able to have multiple interests, still being able to pick up new things, even as a 25-year-old, even into your 30s. I don't know. I'm curious if this is just me or if other homeschool people are like, oh yeah, that is a thing that has benefited me. That is a thing in my life that I enjoy having the ability of. I do think there is a downside to being this type of polymath, however, and the big one for me has always been not being very good at anything. I spent 2 years practicing piano every day, and I got pretty good at it. Like even now, I don't practice as much as I used to because I don't have a keyboard accessible where I'm living currently, so I haven't been able to, do the kind of like I've been wanting to get a little bit more, I guess, expert mode with piano. I want to go big boy mode. I want to learn how to not just play by ear. I want to learn how to read music. I want to learn jazz theory. I want to actually take this to the next level. And that's really hard to do when you're self-taught. It's really hard to just find reliable training material, whether it's on YouTube or elsewhere on the internet, whether it's through books. It's really hard to find good material and to stick with it through that initial really tough period. Another great example of this is when I started trying to produce music. I thought since I knew how to sing somewhat, I knew how to kind of write songs, I knew how songs were structured, I was pretty good at piano. I was like, you know what, let me just focus on like keyboard centric music. I can figure everything else out as I go. But it turns out that music production is a little bit harder than you might think. That's why all these big music producers get paid the big bucks. We often think of artists as individual when it comes to music. You know, you've got like, your individual singer-songwriters, and they make their music, and that's where it comes from. But you don't realize how important a role producers play. You don't realize how important a role the backing musicians are until you try to do everything by yourself. That being said, there are a lot of individual music producers that do a lot of their own stuff, and they do it very well. You can check out, there's a bunch of bedroom pop, and it sounds brilliant. And again, sometimes they have help from producers, but a lot of times it is just a single person doing everything on their own. Now that was my goal. Now to be fair, a lot of times I was trying to do a little more complex style of music. I should have started with something simpler. I think in the cases where I did go simpler, it turned out better. But that being said, a lot of times, not so good. I think that's the big reason why I bring up like Chris Howard, is because he's an example of somebody who has stuck with one thing for so long that he is, at least in my mind, a master. I'm sure in his own mind, he doesn't see himself as that brilliant. But Chris Howard, if you're watching this, you real, big dog. You for real. I guess that's my point, right? Is like, I love this ability to be able to pick up things and not be afraid of that. But I hate how often I put things down. And again, something I started recently is I am trying to, my goal is to be fluent in Spanish, and then I'm hoping to work on to other languages, because I think that it's a good skill to have. I think it's a good skill to work on for keeping your mind sharp and used to learning new things. However, I've gotten to the point where all of a sudden I'm having a hard time retaining words. I'm having a hard time using it immediately when I try to, like, okay, let me try to form a sentence without having to think about it too much, and I make mistakes. I'm like, oh, I used the wrong word, or I use the wrong tense, the past tense, or the plural form of a word. It's not yo quiera, it's yo quiero. Gotta remember that one. But it's that point, right, where you get past that initial, motivation, you get past that initial dopamine release, where you have to push yourself through if you actually want to get good. That's what I was able to accomplish in some part with piano. Even though I'm not where I want to be, I am past that point where a lot of beginners struggle, because I pushed myself through those 2-3 years of practicing every day, of trying to play difficult stuff, of always pushing myself to do harder and harder material. And even now, there's songs I'm working on that are very difficult for me to play, and I always want to be pushing myself. And the wonderful thing is, you go back to the easier pieces, and you're like, oh, these are way easier now that I've done the hard stuff. I care a lot about education. And part of this is because of my own kids. I want my kids to be well equipped, because we live in a world where what you know is everything. Well, not quite. Who you know is everything. What you know helps. I think a lot of people in education spend way too much effort on what to learn rather than how to learn. Now, there is an important aspect of what to learn. For example, when it comes to literature, I think there is a relevant discussion to be had about which works should we study. You know, we need to have some, I believe, from the classics, but we also need to have some modern stuff. And of course, we can't forget that there are a bunch of voices that get forgotten with literature, especially when it comes to, African influences. We tend to forget that, a lot of different voices were ignored through most of history, and I think it's worth going back and introducing them to people. Look at me getting woke on a Friday. But nonetheless, I think that too many people don't come away from education, even higher education, with that ability to teach themselves skills. I believe that learning is a lifelong project. I believe that more people should approach it as that. I don't believe that education begins and ends with compulsory education. I think that everyone should be a lifelong learner. And I think that makes you a more valuable person, not just in a capitalistic sense, but also just in general. It makes your life more interesting. It makes your brain a more interesting place. But that's just me. I'm curious to know you guys' experiences. What if you were homeschooled? Are you a polymath now? Do you consider yourself like a Renaissance person, or is it completely opposite? Do you struggle with like starting new things? Do you feel like you're obligated to stick with what you know? And for those of you who weren't homeschooled, what's your experience with like trying to teach yourself things, trying to learn new things? Is it very similar to me? I'm well aware that this is not exclusive to homeschoolers. I think a lot of people come away from their education still with that curiosity intact. And I'm curious as to why that happens, because I think it's important that we work towards making that happen more often. And anyway, I've been talking for way too long, and I don't know if this video is actually even going to turn out or be interesting, but I hope it was. I hope you come away from this with something, and if not, sorry. Bye.